right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight on Why You Should Read Henry David Thoreau's Walden. The leader of our seminar tonight is Dr. John Kleber, a man that is universally loved here at the McConnell Center. Dr. Kleber was a professor at Morehead State University, and he's the creator and editor of both the Encyclopedia of Louisville and the Kentucky Encyclopedia. Dr. Kleber has accomplished a great many things in his career, but tonight I want to highlight his involvement here at the center and the impact he has on students. Dr. Kleber always helps us with interviews. He takes every freshman class on a trip to Frankfurt. He helps plan and attends all of our McConnell Center yearly scholar retreats. He is our host for our annual favorite event, Camping with Kleber, and he has many wonderful seminars that he leads annually. Most importantly, Dr. Kleber is always willing to help students no matter what. He goes out of his way to help us with almost anything we could ever ask him. Dr. Kleber is a wealth of knowledge, he is a wonderful mentor, and we're lucky to have him as part of our McConnell family. So please welcome Dr. John Kleber.
Thank you, Will. Appreciate that very much. I am delighted to be here, and I thank you for being here. It's good to see you, and I want to thank Dr. Gregg for giving me this opportunity to talk about my favorite book and my favorite author, Henry David Thoreau. So appreciate that very much. And because it is my favorite book, I would like to encourage you to read it, to read Walden. You know, when Walden was published in 1854, it didn't sell very well. Sold very few copies. I love the subtitle of that too. It's on the back of this, Our Life in the Woods, which nobody even thinks about, but that may say it more clearly, what this book is about. In time, this book became so notable that John Updike said it ran the risk of being as revered and as unread as the Bible. It is a manual for self-reliance, personal declarations of independence, social experiment, satire, voyage of personal discovery, and constructive social criticism by drawing attention to both particular and wider issues of society. What I'm going to do is take you on a journey to highlight all of these things. And if you like what you hear, then I encourage you to read it or to reread it. It's not an easy read. But as Thoreau said, not all books are as dull as their readers. One of my favorite movies is called A Room with a View. It's a movie based upon a novel by E.M. Forster. And in that movie, there is an actor by the name of Denholm Elliott. He's much better known for his roles in Indiana Jones. In this movie, he plays a Mr. Emerson, and he lived in an English cottage with a wardrobe that said, "Mistrust all enterprises that require new clothes." Perfect Thoreau. He was a bit of a radical, and as he prepared to move out of the cottage, he said to his son, "Leave me Thoreau until I go. I need him by me now." Well, I have felt like that. I'm not sure when I first read this book, but I have returned to it many, many times. And I hope I do not degrade Mr. Thoreau when I say that it has been for me a self-help book. To read it is to look at things differently, to think about things differently, and to live differently. That may be the core of this book. I think Thoreau felt set up, before I say that, let me say that in the Gospel of St. Luke, Jesus, feeling set upon, withdrew into the wilderness. And I think Thoreau felt set upon, if not by the multitude, then by society. And he withdrew to Walden Pond. Well, I can't withdraw to a pond, but I can withdraw to this book. And you can too. And you can do that by coming with me on a trip. So let's take a trip to Massachusetts And let's go to the town of Concord. And the day is September the 6th of 1847. Then let's walk a short distance out of town to a lake known as Walden Pond. And as we approach it, we see a man looking out across the blue water to the distant hills. He turns, and we see that he's not a handsome man. He has a nose that he called his most prominent feature, which I can identify with. In fact, he's a pretty ugly man. But we recognize him immediately as Henry David Thoreau, although he was baptized David Henry and changed it after college. On this day, he is 30 years old. He is the scion of a distinguished New England family with Scottish, English, and French ancestry. As a youth, he drove cows to pasture, learning to appreciate both nature and solitude. He did not distinguish himself at Harvard, and he said he learned more about mathematics sailing down the Hudson River from a boat operator than in any classroom. He makes me think of Louis L'Amour, because his education began there on the Hudson River, and Thoreau was also a wandering man. Arriving at the pond in March of 1845, he began an experiment in living. And let me use those words again, an experiment in living. We meet him 2 years, 2 months, 2 days later, when he's ready to leave. And I ask him why he is leaving. And he tells me for as good a reason as he went there. He had several more lives to live and had no more time for that one. How quickly we fall into a rut, and how deep are the ruts of tradition and conformity. Rather than a cabin passage, he would now go before the mast on deck of the World, for there he could see the moonlight amid the mountains. He was now going to take his life and travel and read and write and make pencils and think. Intrigued, I asked him why he went to Walden in the first place. And he replies that because his friend Ellery Channing told him to go build a hut and, quote, devour yourself alive. Then turning serious, he said, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life. I wished to know if life was sublime or mean, and to know that by experience, and then publish it to the world. Seems to me he had some business to transact with the fewest obstacles, and then he would go about setting the world straight. Well, I asked him how it all began. And he said he first had to borrow an axe. And then he built himself a small cabin, 150 square feet. I expect this room is much larger than that cabin. Simply furnished, it held 3 chairs, 1 for solitude, 2 for friendship, and 3 for society. And shelter alone was insufficient because he needed also food. And this he did by his hands alone, plowing a field and planting. Beans, potatoes, turnips, peas. With a wry smile on his face, he says he was determined to know beans. Here, too, his diet was simple, and the cost and labor were minimal. It was even possible to survive by 1 day of labor and 6 days of rest. Leisure was more precious to him than the labor needed for any ostentatious housing or pretentious diet. He tells me, most of the luxuries and many of the so-called comforts of life are not only indispensable, but positive hindrances to the elevation of mankind, and also to leisure. Everywhere, things are in the saddle and are riding mankind. Everywhere, things are in the saddle and are riding mankind. And these are things that, if we think about it, are given to rust and to theft. Vanity, all is vanity. I recite an old New England saying. It goes like this: use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without. And with that, he hardly agrees. It is the dissipated who set the fashions which the herd so diligently follows. I tell him that I know a book entitled A Nation of Sheep, and he likes that. I see he is renouncing all present society, that all present society holds sacred. Nor did he need the inventions that are so quickly adopted by society, because he said these inventions are nothing more than petty toys which distract us from what is serious. What some call progress, he calls restlessness, which brings neither inner peace nor contentment. To wit, we are in great haste to construct a magnetic telegraph from Maine to Texas, but Maine and Texas may have nothing important to communicate. Across the pond is a railroad, and he looks over at it, and he remarks how many times its whistle interrupted his meditations, unlike the pleasing sounds of the church bells. But men and women flock to that railroad. They flock to it in a restless need to move on in haste. And to ride upon it requires labor, because you have to purchase a ticket. The best thing to do is to walk, to go afoot, because it costs nothing. Well, if not material possessions, then what is important to Henry David Thoreau? And here he stops and thinks a minute, and then he mentions his fellow New England transcendentalist, Ralph Waldo Emerson. 14 years older, Emerson introduced him to other transcendentalists, especially to Margaret Fuller. The editor of their journal, The Dial, she published his essays. He tells me he often lived in the Emerson home. He tutored and babysat with the Emerson children. But mainly he learned from Emerson, especially when Emerson wrote this: "In the woods we return to reason and faith. There I feel that nothing can befall me in life, no disgrace, no calamity, leaving me my eyes which nature cannot repair. Standing on the bare ground, my head bathed by the blithe air and uplifted into infinite space, all mean egotism vanishes. I become a transparent eyeball. I am nothing. I see all. The currents of the universal being circulate through me, and I am part and parcel of God. I hear that, I turned to him and I said, you know, I heard that you and Emerson once had a disagreement. And he said, yes, and it was because of a visit to Concord. He reminded me that he was no hermit, but frequently walked into Concord to hear the latest gossip. On that one occasion, he was arrested and jailed for not paying poll taxes. The reasons were simply because of his opposition to what he called an unjust Mexican war, and also to the fact that the government had the stain of slavery upon it. He was an ardent abolitionist, and he helped the enslaved escape to Canada. And he even praised the exploits of John Brown. Old Brown became an angel of light. And I will divert here just a minute to say that if you have ever heard the song, John Brown's Body Lies a Molding in the Grave, that became basically the single most significant song of the Union Army of the Civil War. And that song owes itself much to what Thoreau thought about John Brown. An angel of light. When Emerson visited Thoreau in jail, he said, "Henry, what are you doing in there?" To which he replied, "Waldo, what are you doing out there?" And he was not happy when bailed out after one day, maybe by his Aunt Louisa. He tells me he may write an essay on civil disobedience because his spiritual awakening in nature caused him to see the state as unjust and as corrupt. I say if he does, it will have great influence in the future. He tells me that he finished a book at Walden and he calls it 2 Weeks on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers. I said I heard he is the best canoeist in New England, and he agreed. He could do canoe better than anyone else could at the time with one hand or two, up and down the rivers, creeks of New England. Now that he was leaving Walden, he said he planned to do more of that canoeing. He said he might visit Canada and the Midwest and read Greek and Roman philosophy. But they would never take the place of nature's learning. And it was here at Walden Pond that nature taught him the most. It contained all the beauty and grandeur needed, and he became an apprentice to its teachings that were far superior to the classrooms of Harvard. Nature. His teacher was nature. Nature was broad and filled with sounds and smells and sights. It's obvious his powers of observation were phenomenal when he tells me that every little pine needle expanded and swelled with sympathy and befriended him. And he came to intimately know fishes and birds and beasts. Nature can keep us well. It can keep us serene and contented. And he said this: "Our village life would stagnate if it were not for the unexplored forest and meadows which surround it. We need the tonic of wilderness. We need to wade in marshes." Well, it was obvious that for him, we can never have enough of nature. His only needed medicine was a draft of the morning air. And he turns and he points to his cabin where there were no curtains. No curtains, so that the sun and the moon could look in and he could look out at the worlds, at the woods and the pond. To him, a curtain was abhorrent, for it blocked the view of nature. And if it was too hot, he simply retreated behind some curtain nature provided. I tell him that fellow transcendentalist Nathaniel Hawthorne said that in return for his love, nature seemed to adopt him as her especial child and showed him secrets which few others were allowed to see. And that pleased him. The time has now come for me to ask him about the pond itself. He turns and he looks across this expanse, that transparent eyeball. You know, he says, Walden was not my first choice. But when the other pond was unavailable, Mr. Emerson generously gave me land here. That pond is a living thing with a nature of its own and similar to human nature. It warms, cools, moves, rises, falls, changes color, cracks, booms. It is ever-changing, yet remarkably predictable and ever-present through all four seasons. In winter, the ice cutters come and haul away her treasures to be shipped to the world, and so the waters of Walden Pond mingle with the waters of the Ganges. But what is stolen by the ice cutters will quickly be replenished by nature. Visited by many and appreciated more by women, it is a vision of purity and serenity, and all are better for simply having seen Walden Pond. He turns to me and says, how much more beautiful than our lives, how much more transparent than our characters are the ponds. Obviously, he did not need to look anywhere else for amusement. He found everything he needed here on the shores of Walden Pond. As we both gaze across the pond, the surrounding forest mirrored in its crystal surface, I ask him what he learned from 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days. And he smiles and he turns to me and he says, first, do not live lives of quiet desperation. Do not live lives of quiet desperation. And second, if you advance confidently in the direction of your dreams and live life to the fullest, you will meet with success unexpected in common hours. In proportion as you simplify life, the laws of the universe will appear less complex, and solitude will not be solitude, or poverty, poverty, or weakness, weakness. If you have built castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now put the foundations under them. Third, why should we be in such desperate haste to succeed and in such desperate enterprises. If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music which he hears, however measured and far away. For wherever men go, others will pursue him with their dirty institutions and constrain him to belong to their desperate society. Fourth, we can elevate our life by constant endeavor. However mean your life is, meet it and live it. Love your life, poor as it is. The setting sun is reflected from the widows of the almshouse as brightly as from the rich man's abode. Fifth, do not trouble yourself with new things. Do not trouble yourself with new things. And finally, rather than love, than money, than fame, seek truth. He tells me that he sat at a table rich with food and wine, both in abundance, in obsequious attendance, but sincerity and truth were not there, and he went away hungry. The style of the house and grounds and entertainment passed for nothing with him. On the other hand, there was a man in his neighborhood that lived in a hollow tree. His manners were truly regal, and he preferred to call upon him. But to call upon that man, I said, Mr. Thoreau, to call upon that man means that we might have to change. Can we change? And he smiles and he says, every man is the builder of a temple called his body. To the God he worships after his style, purely his own. Like a painter or sculptor, we can alter our material being of flesh and bone. Like a painter or sculptor, we can alter our material being of flesh and bone. Now, finally, after all this, he turns to me and he says, I've got to leave you now. I have to go see my family because they want me to go to work in the family's pencil making business. He smiles. It's a coy smile, and he says, I have a new idea for a better graphite. And I kind of smiled, and he says, yeah, go on and smile. You see, I too can be mercenary. And he turns and he walks away from Walden Pond. And I don't know if he ever returned back. And I stand there for a long, long time, thinking of all I heard him say. How to think. How to live. David Henry Thoreau died on May the 6th of 1862. As he lay dying of tuberculosis, his Aunt Louisa asked him if he had made his peace with God. To which he replied, Madam, I do not know we had ever quarreled. He is buried in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in Concord, near his friend and mentor, Ralph Waldo Emerson. His tombstone is small, reflecting his praise of simplicity. And it is a part reflecting his individuality. I've been to it. And if you've been to it, you know that there is never a time you go there that there isn't something lying on that tombstone. I remember several years ago I went to Ketchum, Idaho, to the grave of Hemingway. And lying on that grave was an empty bottle of whiskey. Lying on Thoreau's grave is something much different. Genius. Genius. In many forms. There are two words I just mentioned: simplicity and individuality. And what I want to do now is give you a 10-minute break. And I want you to think about those two words. And when we come back, I want to talk about that and anything else that you want to talk about in the remarkable book, Walden, Our Life in the Woods. So take a 10-minute break.